Hello and welcome to episode 228 of the Clean Energy Show. I'm Brian Stockton.
And I'm James Whittingham. This week, Chinese automaker BYD has a truck that shows up on a popular YouTube channel. It's called the BYD Shark, thus making this officially Shark Week on the Clean Energy Show.
Fantastic. New York and LA are both betting big on curbside charging for EVs. Nice to know they can put those East Coast, West Coast rivalries aside and focus on the things that matter, like a clean energy future and who killed Biggie and Tupac.
China and the U.S. maybe see their gasoline demand peak. Gas stations will now have to double down on selling lottery tickets and fly-coated hot dogs to stay afloat.
The UK is about to shut down their last remaining coal-fired electricity plant. In protest, conservative politicians have vowed to take up smoking to compensate for the noticeably cleaner air.
All that and a lot more on this edition of the Clean Energy Show. And including your letters and the lightning rounds coming up. And Brian, I picked up my daughter from high school yesterday, minding my own business, beautiful sunny day, driving home. Got in my neighborhood where there's a four-way stop. I stopped at the stop sign, and what pulled in front of me across my field of view, our field of view, but a freaking Cybertruck. A Cybertruck. And of course, I shat my pants, as one would, as anyone would, even if you didn't know what a Cybertruck was, you would probably, excrete something. And
it's like seeing the Oscar Mayer Wienermobile.
No. Okay, that would be nothing.
No?
That would be nothing. This really stood out, and it pulled right past us, and of course we watched with mouth agape and phones too freaked out to pull out in time. And my daughter looked up at, we mentioned this this junk bin place, which is the #1 news source in our city now for some reason online because Facebook banned news. And this horrible racist garbage company is now the source of news. So they posted it and had a picture of the license plate from Texas. But it was like you see something in pictures that's very iconic, and then you see it in real life. It's really weird, I got to tell you. It's like seeing a space shuttle drive by.
It's like CGI or something.
It just did not seem right. Now, in my brief encounter with it, I thought it looked pretty damn good. But I'm not going to, I don't think truck people will buy this thing. Truck people don't want to stand out that much. And I think it's going to be non-traditional truck buyers that keep buying this. That's my view so far.
I mean, I think you're basically right, but because trucks are so popular in North America that they don't need necessarily the traditional truck buyers, but I do think it is now that it's the top selling electric pickup truck, but that's not that hard because, there's not that many electric pickup trucks for sale.
No, but yeah, I'm still I wouldn't buy it myself if I was buying a truck, but we will talk about a BYD Chinese truck later in the show, which is a little bit different and surprising in some ways. How are you doing this week?
Yeah, I'm good. So for the very early part of the show, Calypso, the clean energy cat, joined us on camera here, but has now left. As soon as I started telling the jokes, she was clearly displeased and took off.
That cat needs an agent. It's probably thinking, I'm not going to get any extra treats for this. I'm going to just take off. To hell with you, Brian. But she was there for a while. Which will
plus, the cat does not care for the new robot vacuum cleaner, which we have now installed.
Really?
Yeah. It's we've just tried it a couple of times, only been a couple of days. But yeah, this technology is just getting really good. The thing has LiDAR on it.
LiDAR?
So,
are you serious?
Yeah. So the first thing it does, I mean, iPhones have LiDAR too now, I think. It's not as rare as you
Tony
might think,
Seba years ago said, well, LiDAR is becoming cheap, and in this year it's going to be so cheap that all cars can have it. Well, your freaking robot vacuum has it? Come on.
Yeah, it has it.
Really?
So the first thing it does is you press the program, and it just drives around and maps your house. So it maps like the main floor of our house, which is where we're going to use it.
So then do you send the LiDAR module back to the company after it's mapped the house? I mean, it doesn't need it anymore?
It probably still uses it for object detection and stuff like that.
Identify cat, chase the cat.
Yeah. So the cat just kind of hides away. But then you get a map of your house, and then you can block off certain areas where you don't need the vacuum to go.
How do you do that?
One of my sons. Well, it's draw it on the map basically. So one of my son's rooms, he doesn't want that clean, so you just draw it a red square around it. So it's my son that's sort of set it up and doing the programming. So I don't know that much about it, but it is quite loud. So it is better if you can program it to go off when you're not there. And to do the whole main floor is like almost an hour and a half. So it's quite loud for a long time. So we're going to maybe just set it to do like the kitchen and the dining room every day, and then the rest of the house every few days or something like that. But just to pick up the crumbs in the kitchen, that's kind of almost the main reason we got it for.
Don't you have pets for that?
Well, exactly. We had a pug that used to mop up all the crumbs, but the pug is no longer with us, so the cat does not clean up the crumbs.
Oh, okay. But I thought the cat might be curious about the robot. That's not happening?
Curious, but then just runs away. Like, sometimes pets, the vacuum cleaner is their mortal enemy, and they try and fight it, but ours just hides away.
Does it think you have another pet and it's jealous and just...
Yeah, probably.
Well.
We should put some eyeballs on it to really confuse it. But it's not one of those clips, sometimes you see a clip of a cat riding the mower.
Things could change.
That hasn't happened.
Things could change.
Yeah.
So it's done, and you get this map on your phone of your house. So it actually, did it go into your son's room to map it, or did you have to block it off? Can you block off? It
was my other son that mapped?
Okay.
Yeah, it was my other son that did the mapping. So yeah, I think they allowed it to do the mapping and then just blocked it off. Yeah.
And that works. You've tried it and it works. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can see the floor plan of your house and you're like, yep, that's my house.
Well, can you tell it to just do your kitchen and dining room every day and just do this section every day?
Yeah, I think that's how we're going to set it up. Yeah.
Can you hear it from your bedroom when you're sleeping? It's not something you can do at night?
No, I wouldn't want to do it at night. It'd be a bit too loud.
Is the loudness just the vacuuming part, or is it the bumping into things and changing directions? Or does it even bump into things? I mean, my Roomba would bump into things, right? It had a little movable bumper on it, so it would bump into things and then switch directions. Does yours not do that because it has LiDAR, knows exactly where it is at all times?
I think so. Yeah. The Skype cut out for a second there, but yeah, it seems very good at, object detection and knowing, where to turn. We have a carpet in the living room. It can get on and off of the carpet, and it seems to know that it's on the carpet. Yeah, it's all pretty amazing.
Okay. Well, that's good. I like robot vacuums. I just don't like having to keep the house clean enough to use them. So it hasn't got tripped up on anything yet, eh?
It did get stuck. So I think there may be one or two areas that we just block it off so it reduces the risk of it getting stuck somewhere.
Well, last week we had a discussion from one of our listeners about robot lawn mowing machines, lawnmowers. And yeah, you can listen to that if you missed it. Very interesting stuff. Expensive, but assumably with everything, like LiDAR would be tens of thousands of dollars a few years ago, and now it's on your robot. I can't get past that. That's quite interesting. So I was watching CBC News Network, that's cable news in Canada, and every Saturday morning they have a couple of financial experts on, and often the topic of EVs comes up in one way or another, so I'm kind of curious, and they have different people as their experts, and some of them have surprised me. They've been very bullish on Tesla and know what they're talking about. But I just had to cringe and think, okay, they're talking about the Chinese tariffs that we are placing on their EVs at 100% in the U.S. and Canada just joined that. And I had to cringe because I just knew that it was going to be bad, and it was. I mean, one of them said, that China is content selling to their 1 billion, plus people, and they're not.
No, they never have been. Think of all the industries.
That's why we have dollar stores, Brian, because they're not content in selling to themselves. But that's not the point. The Chinese economy is slowing down, and they have twice the manufacturing capacity for their EVs than they need in China. So they are looking for foreign markets. And I know that we're not a financial podcast, so I'm wondering if we shouldn't change our category on iTunes to financial, because some of these clean energy shows are listed as financial podcasts. Because gosh darn it, we know more than financial people. People should be listening to our show to hear what to invest in, I think, because I shouldn't be smarter than a financial person. That bothers me.
Yeah.
Because it's not my field of expertise. But a lot of what we talk about, we talked about this last week, comes down to, financial journalism, investigating things such as supply chains and doing stories on them. By the way, the New York Times had a great story this summer on the EV supply chain in China, how the Chinese makers, and we talked about that on the show and linked it in our show notes, but I can't remember exactly which episode it was. Brian, we're always talking about how things have changed since we started this podcast 4.5 years ago, as we start our fall season, back from our summer lulls, getting serious again as we ramp things up. Well, here's an example of that. Here's a hard example of how things have changed since we've been on the air. This is Texas solar deployment in that time frame. When we started our podcast just before the pandemic, naively setting out on this road that we have traveled so boldly, was 2.6 gigawatts of solar in Texas. And now it is 10 times that. It has grown is now 26 gigawatts in Texas of solar. That's a hard example of how things have changed. We're always mentioning it. Now I'm going to start giving hard examples of things. A few of you have been here since the beginning. Thank you. But of course, podcasts grow and we pick up people like a snowball eventually. And that's what's going on.
And 2030 is the date that we often talk about for, we expect massive change to happen by then. But this is fantastic. 4.5 years. 10 times as much solar. That's ridiculous.
And that's not it. By the end of next year, the end of 2025, it's going to be at 41, which would make it 16 times.
Wow.
So things are not only rapidly changing, they're picking up pace even further because, as we know, solar, cheap. Another thing, last night, there's this local neighborhood Facebook page, okay? And I find it fascinating. I finally joined it. My partner has been on it and occasionally mentions things. I find it weird what people are doing and, the things that are on their mind and doorbell videos of kids ringing and running. That's now a thing again in the middle of the night. It was when I was a kid. And they're really pissed off about it, probably more pissed off than the parents were in our day. They're really mad. But there's all kinds of things. And a woman asked, she's thinking about buying a house in this neighborhood or somewhere in town here that has solar panels on it.
This is like a neighborhood, some sort of neighborhood
group. It's called the Uplands Community Group, and it's a private group. But I've been very hesitant to ever post anything on there because I do not want to expose myself in any way to the. There's a long story because of previous jobs I've had and things like that, but I do not want to become a part of that. And yet last night I did, and I ended up waking up at 5 a.m. thinking, why did I do that? And I deleted it. But a woman was asking, should she buy a house with solar panels on it? And the reason why I deleted it is because I knew that, it would turn into a political discussion because we live in horrible backwoods territory here. It gets worse by the day, it seems. But she was asking, and I thought, here's some of the key things is that, in Saskatchewan where we live, you're not going to get extra value for those solar panels on your house necessarily. So they're basically free. If you're buying a house, they're probably not going to factor it in, they're probably not going to add $10,000, $20,000 to the selling price. So you're getting free electricity. So that's a good thing if you are buying. Bad thing if you're selling.
Yeah, there's basically no downside except that it makes things like roof repair slightly more difficult. So I don't know. Is that what the person was worried about?
No. They had no idea what a solar panel was, if they worked in cloudy weather or if the lights went out, it's going to turn into a personal, a PM, a DM, if you will, instead of a public post, but I will fill them in and, but I was thinking this is a good opportunity to educate people about solar. I don't want to become part of a political discussion. It's just rubs me the wrong way. It just makes me too depressed about living here.
It shouldn't be political, but it does. But James, you have to remember the prime directive. You do not engage with, from
people.
Star Trek. You remember the prime directive.
Yeah.
No, non-interference with the locals.
Right. But our local left of center party here is driving me so batty. They want to get rid of the carbon tax, and they want to push back the decarbonization from 2035 to beyond that. And meanwhile, China, the thing that is held up as the big polluter in the world, has met their 2030 targets this year already, 6 years in advance. And that's only going to accelerate. And what's it doing for them? It's growing their economy. It is, reducing electricity prices, stabilizing the grid. No, we don't want a part of that. It's something that we shouldn't be a part of. The world's not warming. It's not our fault. Let's not have a carbon price on pollution. Unfortunately, everyone's smart except for you and I, of course, have moved away out of the province. They've, gone. That leaves just crap. It leaves conspiracy believing buffoons who get their news from Facebook and garbage bin companies and don't actually have any, including our goddamn politicians, don't know what's going on outside the bubble of where we are. They're as moronic as that, or they're pretending to get votes, but I'm so pissed off, Brian, I might vote for the Conservative Party just to piss them off. Or I might run for office. Or if I could, I might frickin' just take off and get out of this burg, and because it's just horrible. I hate it. It's just, read a frickin' newspaper, okay? Read a frickin' newspaper. Pick up.
Well, newspapers, that's a bit 20th century, but.
Or something. Just look outside. Go on a vacation somewhere and see what's going on outside your door. Because Regina, Saskatchewan, we're getting left behind. And that's all I have to say about that. For now. But I'll be back again with more.
Well, that brings us to the big city, New York and L.A. We've got two stories here from Clean Technica and from Canary Media about how New York and L.A. are going big on curbside charging. So first of all, in New York City, the city got $15 million from the federal government, a grant to build 600 curbside EV chargers. And it's part of a broader push to put in 10,000 by 2030. 2030 being another so much we expect by 2030. So this is part of the Biden administration's program. They've now handed out $521 million for these kinds of public EV charging projects now to 28 different states. And New York City has a slight problem converting to EVs because it's so densely populated. Not everybody has a parking spot. It's people live in apartments and they have to rely on street parking. Where we live, it's the exact opposite. Pretty much everybody has a parking spot. Even if you live in an apartment, you probably have a parking spot that has like a level 1 charger. But
car-centric
New York City,
car-centric area.
Yeah. Car-centric, and we have lots of wide open spaces, unlike New York. So enter curbside EV chargers, which are accessible from street parking and can get your battery up to 100% over several hours. So these are typically level 2 chargers, 240 volts. San Francisco has launched a program as well, starting in June, a pilot project. They're planning to install 1,500 chargers by 2030. Boston has another one as well. So far, New York has installed 100 curbside chargers. This is part of the pilot that's going to then inform the rest of the program. It started in 2021, and they're putting chargers next to parking spaces that are reserved specifically for EVs. So once you plug in, you pay $2.50 an hour to charge during the day and $1 overnight. And those chargers have seen better use than expected.
It's only $1 an hour overnight?
Overnight. That's fantastic.
I was paying $2.50 Canadian at my hotel in Brooks, and it adds up. So that's really good, actually.
It's always been free at the hotels so far that I've stayed at.
Well, this was partially public, partially hotel. It was sort of on the hotel property, but it was a public charger as well.
But yeah, they say that these chargers are being used about 70% of the time. So that's not bad in terms of, people parking there, and they're being used 70% of the time on these street side spots.
So as long as you can get your car in there late at night, and maybe you have to go move it or something. But then a lot of people, say you're living in an apartment, you would only have to charge it maybe once a week in a temperate climate like New York, maybe twice.
Yeah, in the
winter.
summertime. In the summertime, once a week is probably fine. In the winter, you might do 2 or 3 times a week. So not the most convenient. But the key to this, and the one I'm going to talk about in LA, is lamppost charging is kind of seems like the best and cheapest way to do that.
Because the electricity is already there. And by the way, they used to use more electricity till they switched the lamps out to LED. And now they actually have, spare electricity. This is something I've read that's a plus about these lamppost chargers.
Yes. Now, sometimes it sounds like they're only 120 volts rather than 240. So they do have to upgrade them to 240, but it sounds like that's not that difficult.
No, not in North America. It's not. It's just like doubling the wires or something, right?
Yeah, something like that. So
get your electrician's son on the blower, and you should have a hotline where you just pick up a red phone. And
they say one of these lamppost chargers in New York City, they can retrofit the lamppost in 1 to 2 hours. Like that's amazing.
Insane, Brian.
Yeah,
because that's going to be part of your cost, right? Is your labor to do it. So that's, holy Christ, you could do, a whole city in a summer if you wanted to, maybe. That's very good news. So this is for people who are living in apartments and park on the street, assumably, although one could put it in front of a restaurant like they did in the small town that I mentioned a week or two ago on our show. And and you could, just park there and use the businesses while you're charging, which is nice too.
And it just makes sense because, these street side spots are there anyway. They're there, they're taking up space, but this really increases the usability. It's, you're not just housing a car.
And some people are, Uber drivers, and maybe they want to, the people who are driving Ubers are not necessarily the richest people in the world, obviously, so they're not going to have maybe a garage and a house. Maybe they're living in that apartment and parking on the street, and they could have a topped-up car by the morning if it's, powerful enough.
Yeah, and so Los Angeles is doing something similar. Theirs is called Plan. LA is going pretty big on EVs. They want 25% EV adoption by 2025, and they want 80% by 2035. So the Los Angeles Bureau of Street Lighting, who know that was a thing, but there's a thing, the LABSL. The Los Angeles Bureau of Street Lighting, they've commissioned the installation of EV chargers in streetlight poles as well in Los Angeles. So it's going to be a similar kind of thing. And again, the lamppost thing, it just seems like a no-brainer. It's 1 to 2 hours. This is the cheapest option. This, may have to be supplemented with other charging in parking lots or something that maybe won't be as easy to install. But lampposts and tons of lampposts in LA, lots of street parking. It's a no-brainer.
And this is a part of the puzzle, but it's an easy part of the puzzle, which is great to see. Oh, it's time to dip into the mailbag, and what a thick mailbag we have this week, Brian. It's overflowing with letters. It's going to make up a great deal of our show this week. In fact, that's good, because we love to hear from you. If you haven't already and you're thinking about it, cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. This letter is, hello, fellas. This year I ran my 2019 Kona EV at the Saskatchewan International Raceway. As a demonstration, I participated in the street legal class and competed in the points series, and he's recorded a clip. So we love it when people record, on SpeakPipe so we can hear their voice.
Yeah.
Well, we got more than that. We got the voice and the ambience. So let's go to the Saskatchewan International Raceway for one of our listeners talking.
A lot of Chinese vehicles.
Hello, Brian and James. My name is Glenn Wright, and I'm just leaving you a message from the Saskatchewan International Raceway. I'm running my 2019 Hyundai Electric Kona out at the racetrack this year in the street legal class to demonstrate two things to car enthusiasts. Those two things being that we can reduce our impacts and we can replace fossil fuels with electricity or any other clean energy. The electric car is proving to be a really consistent race car, and as it turns out in the series of the street legal class, the races that are run this year, I'm presently sitting at number 1 in the points standings. So I'm hoping for a good race today and hoping to continue to demystify electric vehicles and the clean energy transition that's well underway. And I certainly thank you for the work you're doing with the Clean Energy Show. It is a beacon of good information in the smog of misinformation that we sit in here in Saskatchewan. Thanks again.
Yeah, no kidding, eh? No kidding. Smog of disinformation, literally standing in smog. That's fantastic. Thank you for sending us that, Glenn. I'm going to continue reading your letter in a moment. But yeah, that's wherever you are. If you're riding a subway or if you're whatever you're doing, you know, you could record what is it? Apple Notes. What was the Apple function when you want to just record something?
Yeah, memos, I guess.
Memo. You could record a voice memo that way and send it to us, attach it to an email. I'll continue reading the letter now. It says, it turns out that I came in second place overall for the year against seasoned veteran racers, which Glenn is apparently not. The EV is definitely a competitive car. Now, I wouldn't have thunk that a Kona EV would be your race EV to go with, but that's what he did. He said there was many folks out there who don't like EVs, but many were curious. I would hate to take an EV to a racing group of people.
Yeah, I don't want to do that.
Good for you. One of the executive members of the governance body for this track said that it is one of the only racetracks in Western Canada that hasn't banned EVs for the fire risk. Did you hear that, Brian?
Yeah. So giant tanks of gasoline are fine then, I guess.
I don't know. Where's the defibrillator? I think I need a jolt here somewhere. It's really making me mad because there are statistics, and it's not like some jackass in a basement compiled them. They are government organizations. They are insurance industries, which do not mess around because they make their, prices based on actual data. The fire risk to EVs is lower by far than gas cars. It is at least 10 times, if not 20 times lower than a gas car. And these people are making policy, the SIR organization, based on Facebook shite. I don't know. Like, come on, people. Is the education system failing us? What is going on here? He says, my dad also raced his Tesla Model Y dual motor out there, too. It is not performance version, he points out. That's something more, the dual motor will be faster because you have two motors to get off the line. He says, our best times for the year were the 2019 Kona EV at 14.39 seconds at 97.68 miles per hour. And the Model Y did a couple seconds better at 12.09 seconds. I take it that's a quarter mile? I don't know anything about racing.
Yeah, that would be a quarter mile. Yeah.
And he got up to 115.56 miles per hour. And that, him coming in second must piss a lot of gas people off.
Yeah, and it's a Kona. Like, it's not like
it's basically...
It's a family car.
Yes, it is not a race car. It is kicking everyone's ass. I think folks were more tolerant of me at first, but once they found out how much of a climate activist, and he is, and clean energy geek I was, many felt threatened as they feel that the energy transition is an attack on what they love. Oh, boo-hoo, you snowflakes of gas and oil. I think we can still enjoy racing with EVs, including my drive to and from the racetrack and all-day racing. I use about 22 kilowatt hours per day, about half of my daily solar production in the summer, or the equivalent of 2.5 liters of gasoline. Now, a racer friend says that he often spends 300 to 400 Canadian dollars per weekend on fuel, or a minimum of 150 a day, totaling a trailer for the race car and travel back an equal distance home each night like he does. So my fuel costs are about $4 a day of racing compared to his $150 a day. Seems like a no-brainer to me, and I don't think you have to know math, Brian, to realize that's a good deal. I suppose I shouldn't have worn my button, declare a climate emergency this past weekend. Uh-oh, that's something I wouldn't have done. as a guy who deletes his Facebook posts. Keep up the great work. We are still pushing forward our Saskatchewan climate litigation. He's part of that. We've mentioned that before on the show. Check out our website for the most recent update, and that link may be in your audio show notes this week. That's from Glenn Wright. Glenn is a heck of a guy, does, one of the leaders in climate action here in Saskatchewan. And thank you, Glenn, for the letter.
So I caught a YouTube review recently of the Kia EV9, and this is from Tech Gadgets Canada, Erin L. from Calgary. And she normally reviews things like robot vacuum cleaners. So, I'm very familiar with the channel, but it was her first time driving an EV and first time reviewing it. And it was the Kia EV9, that large SUV. And the thing that surprised me is she didn't know how peppy electric cars were. She was expecting the opposite. Like you would think by now, again, we live in a bubble where this stuff is common to us. You would think by now everyone would know that, oh, no, electric car, like she could take the EV9 to a racetrack and do very well.
Obviously. So that says, hey, if you have an EV, let people test drive them. I think that's important. Because they may not at the dealership. I try to do that whenever possible. It's kind of iffy when you have a brand new car and you're kind of scared to let other people drive it. But after you have it for a while, then it's like, okay, take the wheel, let's go for a spin. And, it's not the same as when you took me in your Model S and like set my brain to the back of my head and, almost killed me by accelerating. Well, I think it's probably a different experience for people to actually get out there and drive them. Brian, would you read the next letter?
All right. I'm sitting here in the second last ICE vehicle I ever purchased, thinking about Patreon rewards. When the last one is paid off, I get to move up in the world. Here is one of my favorites from Canada Land, a fob bottle opener. So we asked our listeners what rewards or perks they might want if we launch a Patreon campaign to fund the podcast, which we're expecting to do. So he enclosed a picture of a key fob type bottle opener, which was a perk from the Canada Land podcast. Continues here. I've always thought it could be a good conversation piece to talk about Canada Land. I could also see that glow-in-the-dark dog collar thing you were talking about, Brandon, for your show. That's something that came up a while ago, that people were putting on their home charge cords to find them in the dark. So that's another kind of possible product port.
And that was a dog collar that I trimmed to size. It's like a glowing tube, and it fits. Like people with bolts for a few years now have been putting them in their charge ports because you can sort of wedge them in. You open the charge port door, and there's the actual receptacles, but around that there's a space where you can jam in. So it's all lit up. Yeah. And during this wedding we went to, my wife's brother is a former gearhead, and she showed him the EV. He was quite impressed, and she turned on the dog collar to show him the charge port, and he was very impressed with one pedal driving and things like that. So that's something that hadn't occurred to them. But yeah, I think we need to start realizing that we're past the point where people know anything about EVs, so we need to help educate, because there is something to know, and including, how to use your apps to find chargers on the highway, the fact that, in our area that things aren't going to work as well in the wintertime when you're charging fast. It'll charge slower if you are taking a highway trip. But generally speaking, I mean, almost everyone that I've ever read about, and I've read tens of thousands of comments over the years, people say this is the best car I've ever had. Even the people who turn in their cars because it doesn't meet their needs, they thought it did, and they're doing lots of commuting on highways and stuff, and they're trying to save money by getting an EV, they still say, the best car I ever had, but unfortunately I had to trade it in for X, Y, or Z, and then I'll hope to be back one day. Very few people are mad and say they'll never get another EV, in my experience. But yeah, so Sean, thank you for that letter. That's great. If anyone else has some final thoughts on what we can do for perks for our Patreon, that's when you donate a little bit of money every month and you get a perk. You get some sort of benefit for doing that, part of a little club.
Yeah, and we might do an extra episode a month or something that's just for the Patreon. So we're still working it out.
Yeah. So another letter here, it says, I was talking to a local, this is from Bob, I believe. He's also a local. We got 2 local letters this week. Or 3 even. Jeepers. we do expand around the world. Don't be afraid to write us if you're not local. And we don't, necessarily know the locals very well or have ever met them even, I don't think. But
we don't like to leave the house.
No, we don't like to leave the house or post on Facebook neighborhood groups. I was talking to a local Hutterite yesterday. Now, what's a Hutterite, Brian? We need to clarify because that's something specific to us. Can you define a Hutterite?
Yeah, similar to Amish, I guess you would say.
Sure. So they're commune, religious people who stick to themselves mostly and have Hutterite practices that are efficient. Now, way back in 1989, I've mentioned this before, I worked on a Soviet Union documentary on the Canadian family farm because they were starting to go beyond the Russian system and look at new ideas. And the Hutterites had the best ideas back then in 1989. For instance, they had hog barns with floors that were permeated so the poop fell through, and then they turned that into fertilizer, and the hogs ended up being happier and cleaner. And I remember that from so long ago that they had innovations then. Well, this is back to the letter. I was talking to a local Hutterite yesterday who told me they did not use any fertilizer this year. This is the whole colony, which could involve hundreds of people. They used a tractor exhaust system from Pincher Creek. So basically, I have a picture of it here. You can see it, Brian, that the exhaust gets turned into, it's basically carbon capture. It solidifies the carbon coming out and then injects it into the ground as a fertilizer. It's called bioagtive, which collects exhaust from his tractors and injects the material back into the ground as a carbon-based biofertilizer, he writes. Hoses connect his tractor's diesel exhaust to a system that cools the gases. The filtered carbon water is spread along with the seeds or piped through his irrigation. Piped through his irrigation system later. He says he saw almost immediate improvements in his crops and soil. Thank you, Bob, for that. That's interesting. I've read up about it because I think there was a link that he sent to old CBC article on that. Some experts are skeptical, but hopefully it seems like, because fertilizer uses a lot of greenhouse gases and it's not necessarily ecological to do fertilizer. So this is interesting. Of course, if you had an electric tractor, that wouldn't be the case, but
then you couldn't do it. Yeah. This, of course, it relies still on having a diesel tractor, and we hope to get rid of those. So, I would call it an interim type of solution.
Sure. And, somebody else was mentioning, or maybe it was him that was mentioning that they didn't think that tractors were going to electrify. Well, I think they are. There seems to be a lot of movement towards that. And there was an article, I think it was in the New York Times or Bloomberg, about electrifying the farm. And then that person, the columnist, said that it was going to electrify everything, including the combine, which I'm very skeptical about because you only use them once a year. You use them on neighbors' farms, and they're not sitting around for a couple of months. They could be working, but they're around the clock. Once you do have the right conditions to harvest, they go around the clock, and they're big machines.
Yeah, once they start harvesting, they can go for several days in a row. So, the charging time might be an issue, but it's a no-brainer. All this stuff will eventually electrify.
Again, we love to hear from our listeners. Anytime you want to contact us, anything that's on your mind, anything at all, cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. And like I say, you can leave us a voicemail message online at speakpipe.com/cleanenergyshow. And looking forward to more letters, and nothing better than when people get back to us and hear what's on their minds.
All right. So from Canary Media, the UK is about to stop using coal to produce electricity. This is absolutely amazing. This month, the United Kingdom will shut down its last operational coal-fired power plant, a major milestone as the country's CO2 emissions continue to plummet. This is very good news. The country once boasted the world's first coal-fired power plant, and they're now going to eliminate it from the grid.
They invented coal-fired power plants,
yes.
And now they're getting rid of it. They're
getting rid of it.
Amazing.
This is great. So they're going to shutter the Ratcliffe-on-Soar power station, the last operational coal-fired plant in the UK. And there's an amazing chart in this article, again from Canary Media, that it has all of their energy sources: wind, solar, hydro, nuclear, and coal. Coal, it's amazing, was as high as 39% in just around 2013. 39% of the grid was powered by coal in 2013, and it's down to like less than 1% now, and then will be zero in the next 2 or 3 weeks as they shut down this last plant. Now, unfortunately, they still have quite a bit of natural gas, so that's going to be the next target for them. But yeah, this was made possible by their embrace of wind power in the UK, both onshore and offshore. In the last decade, renewables have surged from generating about 8% in 2013 to now 29% in 2023, with coal, of course, plummeting over that period. This comes as amid a backdrop of declining electricity demand. This part surprised me a bit. We kind of assume that electricity demand is going to keep soaring, but for some reason in the UK, they use 17% less electricity in 2023 than in 2013. Even as households adopted, more electrical things like heat pumps, a lot of them also adopted more efficient home appliances.
LED
and
lights.
Their economy.
That was a big one.
LED lights.
You can't dismiss that. That was a huge thing that reduced power demand in that time period.
But also they have shifted in their economy away from energy-intensive manufacturing jobs. So the loss of some of those jobs. The electricity use has been declining. I do expect it to start cranking up again. But this is helped. Overall emissions in the UK have plummeted. We've talked about this before. They're now at the lowest emission levels in the UK since 1879. That's
stunning.
Just absolutely stunning. And so they're going to try and decarbonize the grid by 2035. The other thing that's not talked about very often, Hannah Ritchie talked about this in one of her talks looking at statistics. People don't often talk about per capita emissions. Per capita emissions are generally going down. If you think about, populations were a lot lower in, say, the 1950s, and there was a lot of dirty energy around. So chances are the per capita emissions of your grandparents was a lot lower. Now, of course, the population has greatly expanded. So overall emissions have gone up. But as we get more efficient, as we get smarter about these things, per capita emissions are going down, and even overall emissions in the UK, which is a little surprising. And this always makes me think of, I've mentioned this many times before, but it's so great. There's that Netflix show, The Crown. And in their first season, episode 4 is an episode about the London fog of 1952, which was not a fog at all. It was the London smog. And
it was weather conditions that made the smog from coal very bad. And
yes, and they had not only the coal power plants, but a lot of people used coal in their homes to heat their homes. So in 1952, there was just this weather system that just settled in over London. It did, it just basically they had to wait for a wind to blow it all away. But thousands and thousands of people died. It was so bad. And that episode of The Crown, season 1, episode 4, it's a dramatization, but it's based on fact. And it's a really good lesson in how all that went. And, here we are, 2024, and they're finally shutting down their last coal plant.
If you watch one episode of The Crown, that might be one to check out on its own, because it's kind of like some of the best episodes of the big marquee series are like films, standalone sort of films in themselves. So that's great. Yeah. So that's good news, and it makes me angry though, because we are 45% coal in our jurisdiction. We're doing nothing. We're sticking our head in the sand, pretending climate change is not real, not a prescient sort of thing that we need to address right now. And we're special because we love our oil. Well, I'm moving. I don't know where to. Hawaii? Has anyone got property in Hawaii at a reasonable rate? Let me know.
Let's do it.
I got to get out of here. I can't stand this place. This is time for the EV of the Week.
EV of the week.
Okay, it's
Wow,
not
this
an
is
EV.
still a segment?
Yeah, it's still a segment, Brian. It doesn't happen every week, but it's a marquee segment of our show, EV of the week. It's the I just like playing intros to things, you know that. This is not really an EV. It's a PHEV. This is a plug-in. No, it's a plug-in hybrid, but this is the BYD Shark pickup truck. This is their first attempt. This Chinese major automaker that is set to be the world's largest automaker by 2030 and has surpassed some of the Japanese brands already, not Toyota, as being one of the top automakers in the world. They have their first attempt at a pickup truck is pretty good. It's called the Shark, and it is has a small battery in it, about 40 kilowatts. So you can basically drive what you need to do all day in it on electricity, and then a gasoline engine. It doesn't kick in where it powers the wheels like many hybrids do, but it powers the battery. It's a generator. It's a four-cylinder engine that works as a generator to quickly charge the battery. So it always works as an EV. You have the same horsepower and torque and response all the time, even if that engine is on. And of course, you get like 500 and 600 miles of range or something like that, 500 miles of range with the gas engine. So
Yeah. And we're not huge fans necessarily of plug-in hybrids because we would prefer fully battery electric, but the Chinese cars in the last couple of years, they've really increased the range. So with this truck, 97 kilometers or about 60 miles of EV range with the battery, guess what? You're not going to have to use the gas engine all that much, especially, around here, most people just use their pickup trucks to go buy groceries and stuff.
they do. And if you're towing, that's one of the bigger problems. Now, this only tows about half as much as, Rivian and Tesla and Ford F-150. Tows about 5,500 pounds, but that's good for a modest-sized camper with some to spare. But when you start towing, then your range greatly goes down to maybe a half or a third, or even worse in cold weather. So, yeah, that's where the gas. If I had a pickup truck, I would want something like that. I wouldn't want a hybrid. I would want it to always work as an EV because that's the best part of it. But yeah, like you say, though, you could get by and never have to touch your engine until you leave town. And, that's enough for most people every day, even in the wintertime when it's cold, to heat the engine, to heat the cabin. So you plug it in every night and you get your 97 kilometers of range the next day. Yeah, I'm happy. And, TFL Trucks, the YouTube channel that's very popular for reviewing trucks, they have an EV channel, and this is a short clip from their video out today talking about it.
A lot of Chinese vehicles in the past have had a reputation for being
Poorly made.
and
Yeah.
also copying Western designs.
Yes.
This is the first vehicle I've been in a long time where I stepped in here and said, wow, this doesn't feel like a copy of a Tacoma or a Nissan. And the build quality feels exceptional. It's really good.
What I know.
Yeah, this is something that I keep seeing in reviews. The build quality is exceptionally good. This is not maybe what your predisposed expectation of a Chinese vehicle would be. They're actually surpassing most vehicles and approaching luxury status, the level of, say a Mercedes or something like that, a German-built luxury vehicle. Nothing. And Brian, half the price of a Tesla.
And that may be your answer right there as to why we have a 100% tariff in North America, because this could be a real problem.
Stuff like this would take over, and our auto companies who are dragging their ass would get off the planet like that in a matter of a few short years. So this is one they found from a friend in Mexico. They drove it up over the border to Texas, and they went down to review and compare the Rivian, the Tesla Cybertruck, and this. And they preferred the Rivian for looks, but this thing doesn't look bad at all, and it's very functional. And apparently, from the owner, that the the auto drive systems, the lane keep assist, and all that, where it drives you down the highway without touching it, works extremely well. The tech is very good, and it's got like a 53 gigabyte hard drive on it. Like, it's got a lot of storage space for their, you could download all kinds of apps. Like, it's not even close to being, ever full or anything like that. You could download movies and watch them. Anyway, that's TFL YouTube channel, TFL EVs. Good guys doing good work.
And this next story is sort of China related in that it came up a few weeks ago on the podcast about how you were talking about universities in China and the research that was going into things like batteries. That this is just a massive thing in China with universities doing research. And just off the top of my head, I thought to myself, well, I guess the reason we probably don't have that here in North America is because of a history of fossil fuel funding at our universities. And I walked for coffee this morning and walked past, I sometimes go to our university, our local university campus for coffee, and walked past the Petroleum Technology Research Center, which is one of the buildings that we have on our campus. There's also the Greenhouse Gas Technology building, two whole buildings that are, legacy funded from fossil fuels, which in their defense were built some decades ago. So, this is not necessarily new, but this is the whole point. This is entrenched. The universities in North America, many of them, especially here in oil country, have entrenched fossil fuel funding. So there's an article this week from The Guardian, university funding from fossil fuels slowing the switch to green energy. So somebody did a study published in the journal Wire's Climate Change on Thursday. 6 researchers pored over academic articles on industry's funding of research for the past 2 decades at universities. Just a handful of them focused on oil and gas companies, showing a worrying lack of attention to the issue. So when you're funded by fossil fuels, you're not likely to write any papers criticizing them. So they found out in the research roughly 14,000 peer-reviewed articles about conflicts of interest, bias, and research funding across all industries from 2023. Only 7 mentioned fossil fuels. When the authors broadened their search to look at book chapters, they found only 7 more. But even by combing through the small body of existing scholarship, the authors identified hundreds of instances in the U.S., U.K., Canada, and Australia where oil and gas interests had poured funding into climate and energy research while sitting on advisory or governing boards, endowing economic posts, sponsoring scholarships, advising curricula, and otherwise influencing universities. And I used to be a university professor at our local university, and I generally really enjoyed it. Like, it's hard to think of a better job than that. It was amazing. But, the first thing I noticed when starting to go to meetings and being involved in the administrative aspect is just how incredibly slow everything is. There are massive bureaucracies at universities. It's like trying to turn around an aircraft carrier. So there's a real momentum here in place that started decades ago with fossil fuel funding. And unfortunately, it's going to take a couple of decades more to turn that airship, that aircraft carrier around and move these things in another direction. But China doesn't have that history, right? This is what came up a few weeks ago. They don't have the history of the fossil fuel funding at their universities. So what do they have? They have a history now, starting recently, of battery research.
Yeah. I don't know.
I guess you can move to China.
It's time for the lightning round.
Lightning round is a fast-paced look at the latest headlines in climate, clean energy, and transportation.
Ooh, Brian, are we running long this week? You know what that means? It means I'm going to have to edit the video podcast down to fit it on some of the platforms because it has to be in under an hour. This is from Bloomberg. The number of incidents involving lithium-ion batteries overheating on passenger planes hit a 5-year peak last year, with vapes and e-cigarettes being the biggest culprit. The e-cigarette's going to bring down your health. It's going to bring down the jet one of these days.
Yes, and they've tightened up rules about what lithium-ion batteries you can put in your luggage, which I now think is basically zero. Any batteries you have to carry on.
Okay. This is from Carbon Brief. China's CO2 falls 1% in Q2 2024. That is the first 3 months of this year. CO2 emissions have fallen 1%. It is on the decline. The first quarterly drop since COVID-19. Canadian polling. This is Canadian polling in our beautiful country of Canada that we are broadcasting from. Support for 100% tax on all Chinese-made electric vehicles. Support 63%. Oppose 27%. You idiots! You don't know anything about EVs. You don't listen to this podcast. Share this podcast with your Canadian friends so they become
James is
smarter.
moving to China.
No, I'm not, because I'll be imprisoned almost immediately. Bloomberg New Energy Finance, BNEF, has a lower view of total vehicle fleet outsized outlook with OPEC and Exxon. So they are thinking, what is the vehicle fleet going to be in the world? How many cars and trucks are there going to be in the world in 2040? And they have projections for this. And Bloomberg has a lower view of the total vehicle fleet was OPEC, so they do that, and Exxon, so they can, how much oil are we going to need in the future? They all are predicting the future of oil consumption. So BNEF predicts only 1.6 billion cars on the road in 2040, viz. 2 billion for the others. Shared mobility is a part of it, and so is demographics. Working age population in China is dropping fast, and urbanization is surging in India. And of course, both problems are wrong. These things are wrong because there's going to be robotaxis by 2040. You can't argue against that. It's going to happen. It's happening now in cities. To think that it's not going to advance to the fact that it can spread to other cities in the next, 15 years or so, that's stupid thinking. Oh, it's time for a CS Fast Fact. Over the last 15 years in the United States, average fuel economy has increased by 25%. It's gone from 20 miles per gallon 15 years ago to 25 miles per gallon. Thank you, Obama. Obama had a lot to do with that, and that also had a lot to do with EVs getting going, right? An oil and gas industry group in Canada says environmental groups must be held to the same truth in advertising standards as other sectors under new federal greenwashing rules, which they were boo-hooing about the oil industry, and even our left-wing politicians in Saskatchewan were boo-hooing about that. We can't make the oil industry have to jump through hoops to tell the truth. We can't do that. That's not fair to them. That'll affect our jobs. What jobs do you have if the planet is burning, you morons? I agree. You should have to. They shouldn't lie either, obviously. But it shouldn't be too hard because their whole essence isn't about lying like the oil industry is. So that's bogus. In 2012, the stretch goal supported by the Department of Energy in the United States, Sunshot, that is the program to get solar going, was to get solar module costs down to $1 a watt by 2020. And what happened? In 2024, if you haven't noticed, you haven't checked your watch lately, Brian, modules cost 10 cents a watt, which is a tenth as much as what they were hoping to get to. And it's even less than that. This week has dropped below the 10-cent mark. So that's how fast things are moving. That's why we have a show every week. UK August EV sales up 10% year on year and reaching 22.6% of new vehicle sales. Tesla integrates Uber driving navigation directly into its vehicles. This story is from Electric. No need for a phone to be mounted on your dash if you're a Tesla owner and Uber driver. That is a great idea, and I hope other companies do the same. That's a really good idea, because I know there's a lot of Teslas that are working as Ubers in some places. Tesla just became the #1 in the United States for most utility-scale solar. Not surprising.
You said Tesla instead of Texas.
Okay. Retake. Texas just became the #1 in the United States for utility-scale solar. Texas is #1. You wouldn't know it by hearing their politicians. And finally this week, Bloomberg opinion columnist Liam Denning thinks U.S. oil demand may be peaking, as in now. This summer, Americans got back to driving about as much as they did before the pandemic, in terms of trailing 12-month vehicle miles traveled. Yet gasoline demand is down so far this year. So the miles traveled are up, but the gasoline demand is down. What does that tell you, Brian? You're not a brain surgeon, but you can put A and B together and get C. It remains about 4% below the peak of 2018. More miles equating to fewer gallons is not a good equation for the oil industry, he writes, and heralds a profound development that U.S. gasoline demand, the world's single largest pool of oil consumption, has almost certainly peaked for good. On any reasonable view, U.S. gasoline demand, accounting for 1 in every 12 barrels of oil consumed worldwide, has peaked. You heard it here first on the show. It's over, oil.
Fantastic. Good news to end our show this week. Please take the time to contact us, cleanenergyshow@gmail.com, or around social media. We are at Clean Energy Pod.
And the video version of our podcast can be found on YouTube, TikTok, and believe it or not, Instagram. That's right, an hour of us on Instagram. Not a photo's not good enough. Listen to us for an hour. Because why? Because we can. The weekend it's when it comes out following the audio version. If you're into that, maybe you're watching on video. If so, consider the audio version. It's edited and really nice and crisp and clean, and you don't have to look at me. Of course, people like video, so what am I going to do? I'm not going to discourage you. Audio listeners, please remember to subscribe on your favorite podcast app, the one that you're listening to this podcast on, so then you get new episodes delivered to you every week, and we will see you next week.
See you next week.
The Clean Energy Show.